A neighbouring country of Russia is in turmoil, torn between East and West, and partly occupied by Russia. No, it's not Ukraine, but Georgia. Unrest has been sparked by reactions to a new law against so-called foreign agents. But the history of imperial and post-imperial friction stretches back a couple of centuries. And this includes the history left behind by Georgia's most famous son, Joseph Vissarionovich Dugashvili, or Stalin. Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
Last week saw tens of thousands of Georgians pour out onto the streets of Tbilisi, protesting a controversial new law that's being pushed by the ruling government. As part of the proposed legislation, organizations that receive more than 20% of their funding from abroad will have to register as foreign agents. Opponents of the bill, including EU officials, said it could ruin Georgia's chances of joining the EU, and that this legislation is similar to one previously introduced by Moscow. Some analysts say this move is a sign of Georgian elites, as well as the country's ruling party, betting on Russia to win the war in Ukraine. To get into the Kremlin's good graces, Tbilisi is planning on introducing laws that mirror those in Russia. Georgia's so-called attachment to Russia dates back to the late 18th century. After vowing to protect eastern Georgia, Russia did not fulfill its promise when the Persian Empire invaded Georgia in 1795. In 1800, Emperor Paul I signed the proclamation on the annexation of Georgia into the Russian Empire. After successfully doing so, Georgians would not experience independence until 1918, when they established the First Democratic Republic of Georgia. However, this freedom proved to be short-lived, as in 1921, Georgia was invaded by Bolshevik forces forming the Soviet Union in 1922. Just 6 years later, the bloc would be ruled by a new leader. Between 1928 and 1953, Joseph Stalin, a Georgian, led the USSR. Today, the Man of Steel is remembered as one of the most brutal dictators in recent human history. It wasn't until 2003 that Georgia would free itself from Soviet-era leadership by forcing the sitting president to resign as part of the Rose Revolution. Russian forces would go on to attack Georgian towns, turning the feud into an all-out war, with Moscow's troops occupying positions some 40 kilometers away from Tbilisi. In early August 2008, Georgia almost lost its sovereignty to Russia once again. Thankfully, partially due to international pressure from Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, and Latvia, Russian troops gave up on their advances towards the Georgian capital, withdrawing back to Moscow later that year. Fast forward to a few years ago, and Georgia would once again be used by Russia. Over 100,000 Russians fled to Georgia to dodge the draft initiated by Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, despite Tbilisi's open support of Kyiv. With all these facts bundled together, it's clear why the people of Georgia draw comparisons to Russia's authoritarian practices when expressing their disdain for the proposed foreign agents bill.
Our guest today is Wojciech Wojtasiewicz, an Eastern Europe analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs and a specialist at the South Caucasus East Europe programme. So welcome to the programme.
Good afternoon.
Great to have you. First of all, let's take a very brief outline of the current tensions in Georgia, sparked off by the foreign agents a law that's been passed. Could you outline the friction between the two parts of society in Georgia today based on that?
So last 3 weeks we were able to observe the huge demonstrations not only in Tbilisi but also in the other Georgian cities like Kutaisi, Zugdidi and Batumi regarding those law of so-called foreign languages. The government of Georgian Dream prefers the name of foreign influences in Georgia, and this law is dedicated to the transparency from the government's point of view in the community of media and non-governmental organizations. So every organization, every media outlet which is financed at a minimum level of 20% from foreign resources has to be transparent and to present its documents about those finance. From their point of view, it has the aim to destroy those communities before the upcoming autumn elections in Georgia, and they claim that this law is quite similar or even the same like it was in Russia, in Putinist Russia, more than 10 years ago. But it's not the first time when the Georgian government of Georgian Dream, tries to put this kind of law on the agenda. The first time it was a year ago, but because of the huge demonstrations and the negative opinions of European Union and United States, Georgian government decided finally to resign from that law. But this year, once again, they come back to that idea.
You mentioned the Georgian Dream Party, which is a government which is recognized as being pro-Russian. Is that just a reflection of the understanding of Georgia's position? The geopolitical realities of where it is. It's close to Russia, it's a neighbour of Russia. The European Union is very far away.
No, it's much more complicated, unfortunately. It's difficult to, it was difficult to say that the Georgian Dream's government is fully pro-Russians. They rather try to play a game, geopolitical game. As you mentioned, the Georgia is the neighbor of Russia. There was a war between those countries in 2008, so it was a huge trauma among Georgians. And the Georgian government was forced to be patient, to be careful, and they claim that they couldn't support Ukraine in 2022 openly and directly. So that's why they didn't join the Western sanctions against Russian Federation. But from the other point of view, they started kind of play with European Union, claiming that European Union will give a candidate status to the membership of Georgia in European Union only when Georgia decides to join the sanctions. But in their opinion, it means so-called second front of the war in Georgia. It means that Georgia will be attacked by Russia once again. And so they are trying to play with Georgian society in that way. But in my opinion, the truth is that the Georgian Dream's government is not interested in conducting reforms put by Brussels to them, because in their point of view, it means that they will not be able to win the upcoming parliamentary elections.
Is this a rift between a metropolitan or urban elites, Western orientated, pro-EU, and the rest of the country being pro-Russian or the provinces?
No.
Is it as simplistic?
It's not like that. About 85-90% of all Georgian society supports the future membership of Georgia in European Union. But I think we should do more surveys, more studies on it, because most of the Georgian people, when they are thinking about European Union, they're thinking about the better life in United Europe, the opportunity to go abroad and work in European Union's countries. But they are not really into the European values.
They're not.
They are not. I'm talking about, democratic procedures. I'm talking about the media freedom, human rights, and so on. So very often, Georgian governments tries to portray European Union as an organization, as an entity, which is against so-called So it's not like this that only elite in the biggest Georgian cities supports European Union. Also the ordinary citizens, but when they are thinking about European Union, they are thinking about better life, not the European values.
Georgia has also provided an asylum for many Russian exiles who fled Russia. Are there any tensions in Georgian society that's sparked?
I was able to be in Georgia a year and a half ago when those Russians, so-called refugees, come to that country, more than 100,000 people. Now it's about 40,000, and that was quite strange because as you mentioned, there was plenty of Russian people walking on the streets. But from the other point, there was plenty of Ukrainian flags, slogans written on the buildings, anti-Russian, anti-Putinist, and so on. So it was quite strange, and also those influx of Russians had negative consequences because the prices of regular products, but also renting apartments,
yes,
become bigger. But fortunately, there were no openly hostile between Russian refugees and Georgian citizens.
Is this a? Let's go back now into history in terms of the part of Georgia as a part of the USSR, and then we have the Georgian nationalist movements in the early 20th century. Has that left a lasting impression on Georgian mentality towards its neighbour Russia? You mentioned the fact that yes, Russian emigres or draft dodgers came over, but there's no fundamental animosity between the two. Is there a historical imagination how does it see Russia in the view of its relationship since the 18th century?
It's quite complicated history and relations between Georgians and Russians, but from my point of view, Georgia, as I mentioned, was part of Russia after USSR. So there is a part of the society which would like to be independent from Russian influences, and they are the strongest supporters of presence of Georgia in the European Union. But there are also people, especially from the older generation, who spend most of their lives in Soviet times. So still they have some positive sentiments because their lives was better, they were younger, and so on. And they have such kind of thinking that, okay, we would like to join European Union, but European Union is quite far away. It takes time, so we need to conduct a lot of reforms. And Russia is our neighbor, will be our neighbor forever. They are quite close. They have military bases on the occupied territories of Abkhazia, South Ossetia. They can attack us every time, and those people remember the war, the Russian aggressions from 2008. So in their way of thinking, is something like that. It's better to be calm. It's better to be cautious, not to irritate Russia. So the current government, the government of Georgian Dream, conducts the policy do not irritate Russia, because if Russia decides to attack us, no one help us.
Yes, it's probably a very difficult balancing act to do in that part of the world. We have to talk about Georgia's most famous son, otherwise known to the world as Stalin. So he is Vissarionovich, Joseph Vissarionovich Dugashvili. You mentioned earlier, as we were talking about the generational appreciation of Stalin, local boy made good. He became the leader of the USSR, an international organisation, and the youngsters not showing the same amount of reverence for the memory of Stalin. Can you just give us a a taste of what the status of this historical figure, inevitably, is in Georgia today.
The previous government, previous president Mikhail Saakashvili tried to change the historical policy of the state, and he established the Soviet Occupation Museum in Tbilisi. He also decided, to remove some of Stalin's monuments from the country, also from Gori, where Stalin was born. But still, he was not able to remove the Stalin's museums from Gori because he was afraid of the negative reaction of the local community. And even that the people who are maybe supporters, it's not the best word, but who have some positive sentiments towards Stalin, even that they know history partially, they know what he did, that he was a dictator, even that they claim that he was a Georgian, he was born here, and look, we have a museum in our town dedicated to him, and this is the source of money for us, the source of income. Our town, generally our country is not very wealthy, so it's better that we have such kind of the museum, and this is why tourists are coming to our town. And after Georgian Dream came to power, there were some rumors, some tendencies to re-establish that memory of Stalin. But generally, I'm pretty sure that most of Georgians are thinking about, thinking in the direction of European Union, not about, the past of the Soviet times of Joseph Stalin. I think it's only connected with the older generation.
Final question, bringing things back up to date. You mentioned the elections in Georgia this year. How do you see these tensions developing in the short term? Existing tensions.
I think that the elections will be kind of a referendum. The final decision of the geopolitical position of Georgia, and the Georgian society will have two alternatives: pro-Russian option or pro-European, pro-Western. But the biggest problem is that the Georgian opposition is very weak, divided, not unified, and the main opposition party is the former ruling party, United National Movements of Mikhail Saakashvili. And unfortunately for them, if they would like to win those elections, he's not really popular among the Georgian society. He has his own supporters, but most of the Georgian society is against him. So they don't want to vote for Georgia Dream, but they also don't want to bring Saakashvili back to the power. And the option is, I think, that the solutions for that problem is to establish a new political force, but it must be done by the young generation. Those people who are participating in those demonstrations in Tbilisi and in the other Georgian cities, but unfortunately they didn't decided yet, to organize themselves in that way.
Sure. Okay, well, we have to leave it there, unfortunately. Wojciech Wojtasiewicz, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
Great to have you. And that's all we have time for today, so join us next time for How We Got Here.